Hey there! Tonight, we're diving into a darker chapter of history. Plagues, punishments, and porridge. Forget the Hollywood version of the Middle Ages with castles and gallant knights. The reality? Filthy, harsh, and nearly impossible to survive for a modern person. Before we dive in, feel free to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy this kind of content. Drop a comment with your location and the current time. Always fun to see where everyone's tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan, and let's begin. You wake up in the year 1325. The good news, you're alive. The bad news, so are the fleas. Your bed is a straw pile filled with bugs, and your blanket is a crusty wool sheet that hasn't been washed in a year. No pillow, no mattress, just grime and cold. A church bell rings in the distance. That's your alarm clock. You live in a one-room wooden hut, sharing space with your entire family, a few animals, and plenty of insects. The air reeks of sweat, stale beer, goat, and something moldy. There are no candles, just a freezing dirt floor. You're 22 years old, which makes you middle-aged by medieval standards, and your body creaks like a wooden door. Getting up means stepping on either rain-soaked earth or dried chicken droppings. There's no such thing as privacy. Your siblings, parents, and maybe a freeloading cousin all wake up next to you. Even if you're alone, you're never really alone. Lice, rodents, and other uninvited guests are always nearby. You crawl out of your straw bed only to be hit with nature's urgent call. There's no toilet, no paper, no plumbing, just a wooden bucket out back, probably already full from Uncle Stan's digestive disaster. Once done, you toss the contents into the street while yelling, "Gardy-loo," medieval code for "watch out below." The streets function as open sewers, a flowing cocktail of human and animal waste. If you live in a town with public latrines, congratulations. You get to sit side by side with strangers in a stinky, unventilated outhouse. Toilet paper doesn't exist. People wipe with straw, leaves, rags, moss, or nothing at all. That might explain why handshakes weren't exactly common. And if you live in a castle, sure, it's different, but not necessarily better. You use a garderobe, a hole in the wall that drops waste into the moat, which attackers sometimes climbed through. So whether you're a peasant or a noble, using the bathroom is public, gross, and dangerous. One slip on the way out and you're face first in yesterday's regrets. And no, you haven't even brushed your teeth yet. But hey, you made it through the worst part of the morning. Time for breakfast. Probably. Looking forward to a warm, comforting breakfast? Think again. This is medieval Europe. Comfort doesn't exist here. Breakfast is a sad bowl of pottage, a thick stew of grains, roots, and whatever else hasn't spoiled yet. It's been cooking in the same pot for days, sometimes weeks, with new scraps tossed on top. Alongside it, a hunk of bread so hard it could stop an arrow, made from coarse rye or barley, often mixed with sawdust or acorns, because wheat is for the rich. And drinks? No juice, no lattes, just weak beer. Yes, at dawn. Because the water is full of parasites. Even children drink it. No one enjoys it, but it's safer than the alternative. Want meat or cheese? That's reserved for feast days. Maybe. Most peasants eat meat only a few times a year. Fruit is rare and spices are fantasy. A bit of pepper could cost a month's wages. Salt is precious enough to be locked away. So you gnaw stale bread, sip medieval beer, and try not to notice the rat that may have sampled your food. Breakfast doesn't energize. It just happens. And once you're underfed, it's time to work like your life depends on it. Because it does. Now for clothes. You own one outfit, a rough wool tunic or linen shift you've worn for months or even years. Underwear? Optional. If you're lucky, you get a linen underlayer. If not, it's scratchy wool on bare skin, stitched by someone who had no concept of seams. There's no washing machine, soap, or dry cleaner. Your clothes are stiff, filthy, and smell like a pigsty. Washing them means hauling water, boiling it, scrubbing with ashes, and drying under the rare sun. Shoes? Maybe. If you do have a pair, they're crude leather with zero support. Most peasants go barefoot, through mud, dung, sharp rocks, and puddles of disease. Naturally, your skin hates you. You itch constantly. Everyone has lice, fleas, and bed bugs, peasants, monks, nobles, even children. It's so common that scratching yourself in public isn't even noticed. Your scalp is a war zone, your skin rubbed raw, and if you get a rash, tough luck. No medicine, no diagnosis. You just live with it for months, like an unwanted medieval sidekick. Once dressed in misery, you head out to work. But before that, how about a smile? In the Middle Ages, that's risky. Not emotionally, dentally. There's no toothbrush, no toothpaste, no floss. Oral hygiene is almost non-existent. Some people chew sticks or rinse with vinegar, but mostly your teeth are on their own. By your mid-20s, your smile resembles a haunted house, full of cavities, swollen gums, and decay that isn't just from last night's meal. Your mouth is a disaster zone. Even though sugar is still rare, and mostly for the rich, it's starting to rot noble teeth faster than peasant ones. If you're poor, you'll get there slowly, thanks to gritty porridge and years of chewing tough bread. Toothaches are constant, like bad weather. People often turn to prayer, booze, or yanked teeth out themselves. Seriously. Barber surgeons, yes, the same guy who cuts your hair, used iron tools and no anesthesia. Infections from tooth decay? Deadly. Without antibiotics, a bad tooth could mean sepsis and death. And romance? Forget it. Everyone has bad breath. Kissing isn't based on smiles. It's about land and livestock. Bottom line, your mouth is losing the war. Now, with your gums throbbing, it's time to head to work. But not an office. You're a peasant, one of the 90%. Your job is to survive while working for a lord who doesn't know your name. You rise with the sun and stop when it sets. Tools are basic: a wooden hoe, a rusty sickle, and your own aching body. No weekends. Sundays off, unless you're harvesting or praying your infected toe doesn't turn black. Work is backbreaking. You plow, weed, carry water, often barefoot. No one cares if you're tired or sick. If you're a woman, you also raise kids, cook, clean, spin wool, and hope your husband's lice don't crawl over to you. Children start working around age 5. No school, no toys, just chores, and a dream of not dying from the flu. Not a farmer? Maybe you're a blacksmith, tanner, or cooper, working with fire, chemicals, or animal guts in suffocating sheds. Pay? Enough to not die. Benefits? Occasional bleeding. Get sick, drink warm beer, and keep going. You can't afford to rest. Don't work, don't eat. And if you can't work anymore, there's always someone waiting to take your place. So you grab your shovel, ignore the pain, and keep digging. In the Middle Ages, your job wasn't a career. It was an endurance test. And after breaking your back in the fields, now comes the weather. Winter meant no insulation, no heating, and walls so thin you could toss a chicken through. Windows were just cloth, firewood was scarce, or illegal to gather, and you might freeze with your feet damp and fingers numb. Frostbite. Just called bad luck. Summer wasn't better. Your home became an oven, with no fans or airflow. Layers stuck to your skin, but you couldn't remove them. Too scandalous. and you'd get sunburned or bitten. The heat was brutal. Flies swarmed, and you still had to work. Heat stroke was just a bad day. No matter the season, your clothes still itch, your food is still awful, and your next chore never stops. Medieval climate control doesn't exist. Feeling thirsty? Too bad. Water's out to kill you. That clear stream? It's likely full of parasites, waste, or a dead pig upstream. So everyone, even kids, drank weak beer, boiled during brewing, so safer than water. Wine, for the rich. Clean water? Fantasy. Bathing? Rare. People believed washing let disease in through open pores. A thick layer of dirt was considered protective. Public bathhouses existed, but were soon shut down for being hubs of scandal. Even if you wanted to bathe, it took hours. Fetch water, boil it, fill a leaky tub, and hope no one else used it first. Or after. Rain barrels weren't safer, full of bird droppings and mosquito larvae. Water was always a risk. Drink it, wash in it, grow crops with it. Every use was a gamble. One bad sip, and you could spend your last days moaning in a straw bed, regretting your life. So next time you turn on a tap, raise a glass to your ancestors. They didn't drink without danger. And if it's not the water that gets you, maybe it's a stubbed toe. That turns deadly. You're sick now. You need help. But this is the Middle Ages, where medicine means torture, dressed up in religious robes. In the Middle Ages, illness wasn't treated. It was endured. Everything from fevers to rashes was blamed on your four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Got a fever? Too much blood. Let's drain some. Sad? Must be excess black bile. Here's a laxative. No matter the issue, the solution was crude and painful. Barber surgeons doubled as dentists, cutting hair and yanking teeth with zero anesthesia. Dirty tools, open wounds, and no antibiotics meant infection was often fatal. Even stomach pain might be blamed on sin. If you got worse, you'd get more leeches, crushed insects, and a priest, just in case. If you lived, credit went to God. If not, at least the leech had a good day. And after all that, time for dinner, if you're brave. There's no fridge, no freezer, just salt, smoke, or luck. Meat, if you had any, was old, fly-covered, and questionably cured. Bread was often padded with bark, sawdust, or clay in bad years. Rye could carry a fungus, causing hallucinations or death. Vegetables were seasonal, turnips were constant. Fruit rotted fast, and sugar was a luxury for the rich. Dairy spoiled quickly. Cheese and butter were safer, but still risky. Spices were so rare, they were worth more than gold. Most meals tasted like boiled rags with a pinch of misery. And even food was political. Game animals belonged to the nobility. Caught poaching a rabbit? You might get fined or hanged. So as you eat your murky stew, remember, every bite is a gamble. In the Middle Ages, food didn't nourish. It tested your survival skills. Evening comes, but you can't relax. Religion is everywhere. Miss Mass, commit a sin, or look sideways at your neighbor's wife. Even your dreams can send you to hell. The church controls your calendar, laws, learning, and life. Prayer bells ring morning, noon, and night, not as reminders, but as requirements. You can't read the Bible yourself. It's in Latin, a language for monks and nobles. You depend entirely on the priest's interpretation. If crops fail, it's your fault for not praying enough. You owe the church a tenth of everything: wheat, eggs, or whatever you have. If you have nothing, you're spiritually bankrupt too. Holidays? They're holy days. No work, but no fun either. Just more prayer, fasting, and guilt. Because joy, in medieval Europe, was always suspicious. Questioning the church in the Middle Ages was dangerous. Heretics were burned, witches drowned, blasphemers flogged. So you obey, chant, bow, and pray for salvation, assuming the priest approves. God may be merciful, but the church rarely is. And if being a peasant sounds hard, try being a woman. Same filth and famine, plus childbirth, submission, and invisibility. From birth, your life path is set. Marry young, have kids, serve, die tired. Education is rare unless you're noble and sent to a convent. Marriage comes early, often around 12, with pregnancy by 14. It's about land, not love. Once married, you're your husband's property, expected to cook, clean, give birth, stay silent, complain, and you might be branded a witch and burned or drowned. Childbirth? A gamble with no prenatal care, sterile tools, or pain relief. Many women died, and those who didn't faced more work, nursing infants while still toiling in the fields. Being unmarried meant suspicion. Being outspoken meant danger. Even nuns had few rights and lived under strict rules. In short, women were expected to endure and do it gracefully. And just when life couldn't get worse, here comes violence. Medieval society thrived on it. Justice meant whatever the local lord said. Crime was punished brutally. Steal a loaf, lose a hand, talk back, wear the scold's bridle, accused of heresy or witchcraft. Prepare for torture. Trials involved boiling water or river dunking. Sink and die innocent. Float and be punished anyway. Executions were public events. Hangings, beheadings, burnings. People brought snacks. Domestic abuse? Normal. Street fights? Frequent. War? Constant. Violence wasn't a breakdown. It was the system. Everyone knew that life was fragile and justice unpredictable. If you somehow survived the lice, infections, and floggings, death still came early. Living past 40 made you a village elder. Most people didn't. Half of all children died before age 5, from illness, hunger, or cold. Those who lived started working young and aged fast. By 25, your body was already worn down. Women died often from childbirth, men from accidents, infections, raids, or crusades. Even a walk to market could be fatal if you met a thief or angry taxman. Plague wiped out cities overnight. Famine could starve entire regions. And sometimes death came from something as simple as bad grain, causing seizures and madness. Funerals were quick and unceremonious. No embalming, no casket. Just a shallow grave and a whispered prayer. If there was still room in the churchyard, you'd be buried in a shallow grave. Life in the Middle Ages was short, brutal, and constantly under threat, from disease, violence, or famine. Retirement didn't exist. You simply stopped showing up. So how was your day? You woke up in filth, used a bucket as a toilet, skipped hygiene, starved, worked until you broke, itched through dirty wool, dodged plague, and nearly got executed over a squirrel. Welcome to just one day in medieval Europe. Still dreaming of being a knight? Think again. The romanticized Middle Ages, chivalry, candlelit feasts, noble quests, was fantasy. Reality was harsh. Born poor? You stayed poor. Born rich? You had better odds but could still die from soup gone bad or an infected splinter. Even castles were cold, smoky, and filled with fleas. Simpler times weren't simpler. They were just harder. Everything took longer. Everything hurt. There was no escape, no opportunity, no search engine to explain your strange rash. And yet, somehow, people still found moments of joy. They laughed, sang, fell in love, told stories. Not because life was good, but because humans are resilient. They made room for hope, even in the darkest times. So tonight, when you slip into a clean bed with running water and heating, maybe give quiet thanks to the modern world and to your ancestors who survived plague, hunger, and feudalism, so you wouldn't have to. Enter Catherine the Great. Before ruling Russia, before becoming an icon of power and reform, she was simply Sophie. Born Sophie Friederike Augusta von Anhalt-Zerbst in 1729 to a minor German noble family. Her duchy was small, her prospects limited, but Sophie herself was sharp, ambitious, and quietly determined. Her childhood was cold and controlled. Her mother, Johanna, obsessed with status, pushed Sophie toward power. Her father, a distant Prussian officer, offered little warmth. Sophie learned early to be observant, strategic, and patient. She devoured books, mastered languages, and studied how to survive in rooms ruled by men. When Russian Empress Elizabeth searched for a bride for her heir, Grand Duke Peter, she looked abroad, and Sophie was chosen. At 14, she was summoned to Russia, arriving in frigid St. Petersburg, wearing light German clothes and a diplomatic smile. To fit in, she converted to Orthodoxy, changed her name to Catherine, and burned the bridge behind her. She wasn't just marrying a prince, she was stepping into an empire with no way back. Catherine's marriage to Peter, however, was far from a fairy tale. He was childish, awkward, and more obsessed with toy soldiers than governing, or his wife. Their union was cold and distant, and some say unconsummated for years. Peter idolized Frederick of Prussia and despised the Russian court. Catherine, in contrast, embraced her new homeland with discipline and passion. She learned the language, studied its customs, and tried to belong. As Empress Elizabeth's health declined, the Russian court became a battlefield of gossip, plots, and shifting power, and Catherine was no longer a pawn. She was planning her next move. As Empress Elizabeth declined, everyone at court had an agenda. Catherine was under constant surveillance, her letters read, her alliances monitored, her every move scrutinized. She couldn't trust her husband, her politically scheming mother, or even her servants. In this world, loyalty shifted fast. But Catherine played the long game. Quietly, she built alliances, winning over military officers, scholars, and power brokers. She remained poised while Peter raged and alienated the court. Privately, she devoured Enlightenment works, envisioning a better Russia, strong, educated, and rational. Her problem: as long as Peter lived, she was trapped. So she waited. In 1762, her moment came. Peter became Tsar and quickly unraveled. He offended the church, nobles, and military, praised Russia's enemies, and even considered divorcing Catherine. Discontent spread. Catherine acted. While Peter vacationed, Catherine led a bloodless coup with support from military officers, including her lover, Grigory Orlov. She rode through St. Petersburg, was declared empress, and claimed the loyalty of the Imperial Guard. Peter, isolated and outplayed, surrendered and soon died mysteriously. Officially, colic. Unofficially, murder. Catherine took power not by birth or marriage, but by brilliance and boldness. Now she had to turn her coup into a legacy. She couldn't just be a schemer, she had to be a sovereign. And so began her transformation into a visionary ruler. She didn't rest. Catherine dreamed of reform, political, military, intellectual. While Peter had idolized warlords, she admired Enlightenment thinkers. She wrote to Voltaire for years, invited Diderot to court, and purchased his library. She pored over legal texts and created the Legislative Commission in 1767 to modernize Russian law. Her nakaz, instruction, spoke of legal equality, condemned torture, and called rulers servants of the people, radical ideas in a conservative empire. But reform had limits. Russia was deeply feudal. To maintain noble loyalty, Catherine allowed serfdom to persist even as she expanded education, built schools, and limited some abuses. She walked a tightrope, philosopher queen in public, practical empress in private. Her reforms were careful, calculated, and always strategic. Catherine didn't try to make Russia European. She tried to make it modern on Russian terms. And she didn't stop at internal reform. Catherine sought expansion. Where Peter the Great had opened Russia to the west, Catherine broke down the walls. Under her, Russia's borders grew rapidly. She led military campaigns, not just for defense, but to reshape Eastern Europe. Her wars against the Ottoman Empire in the 1760s to 70s weren't only about land, they were about power. Catherine positioned herself as the protector of Orthodox Christians and a dominant force in the region. Under generals like Alexander Suvorov and Grigory Potemkin, Russia expanded south, capturing Crimea, the Black Sea coast, and long-coveted warm-water ports. These victories were more than military. They were statements. Catherine was transforming Russia from a remote empire into a European powerhouse. She also looked west. Through diplomacy and strategic alliances, she helped partition Poland alongside Austria and Prussia. By 1795, Poland was erased from the map, and Russia gained vast lands and millions of new subjects. But Catherine's empire wasn't built on force alone. It was shaped by ideas. She encouraged urban growth, opened trade routes, and invited foreign settlers to cultivate the land. From the Baltic to the Black Sea, Russia became a vast mosaic, personally overseen by Catherine. Critics called her power-hungry, but to Catherine, expansion was destiny. Great rulers, she believed, were measured not just by ideals, but by borders. She aimed to remake Russia into a modern, respected empire, loyal to her and feared by its enemies. Yet behind palace doors, her personal life drew just as much attention. Catherine had many lovers, handsome, younger men who were often politically useful. Among them, Potemkin stood out. Brilliant and bold, he was both her partner and strategist. Some even believed they secretly married. Together, they shaped policy, war, and southern colonization. Still, Europe obsessed over her love life. Satirical attacks painted her as scandalous, none more infamous than the false tale involving a horse, spread posthumously to discredit her legacy. Why? Because Catherine was a woman who ruled without apology. In a world expecting women to be chaste or tragic, she chose neither. She separated love from leadership, using relationships as part of her strategy. Loyalty and usefulness mattered most. When a lover outlived his value, she let him go with grace and rewards. Catherine's affairs didn't weaken her. They amplified her control. But her reign wasn't without danger. In 1773, a Cossack named Yemelyan Pugachev claimed to be her late husband, Peter III, back from the dead to reclaim the throne. It was a lie, but to Russia's oppressed masses, it was hope. Pugachev promised land, freedom from serfdom, and lower taxes. His rebellion, fueled by desperation, spread rapidly. Towns fell, nobles were killed, and for a moment, the empire seemed on the edge of collapse. Catherine was shaken, but not paralyzed. She responded with force. In 1774, Pugachev's rebellion was crushed. He was caged, paraded, and publicly executed. The revolt changed Catherine. Her early ideals of freeing the serfs faded. Enlightenment had limits in a feudal world. From then on, she leaned more heavily on the nobility, offering them full control over their serfs in exchange for loyalty. This marked a turning point. The empress who once quoted Voltaire now chose order over ideology. Reform slowed. Stability became her new philosophy. After the Pugachev rebellion, surveillance intensified. Even rumors of revolt were crushed before they spread. Pugachev had lost his head, but he left behind a warning. Power built on inequality could only last so long before the storm arrived. By her final years, Catherine had ruled Russia for over 30 years, longer than any woman in its history. From a foreign-born teenage bride, she had transformed into one of Europe's most formidable monarchs. Under her reign, Russia grew by over 200,000 square miles, swallowing Crimea, much of Poland, and the Black Sea coast, expanding trade, securing strategic ports, and reshaping Europe's balance of power. But her impact wasn't only territorial. Catherine built cultural prestige. She helped found the Hermitage Museum, collected great works of art, corresponded with Enlightenment thinkers, and turned her court into a beacon of sophistication. She opened schools for girls, promoted publishing, and even introduced smallpox inoculation, publicly receiving the vaccine herself. Yet her reign was full of contradictions. She praised Enlightenment ideals, but deepened serfdom. Her reforms, though ambitious, mostly flowed top-down, refining the surface without remaking the core. Still, she brought stability, and more importantly, she understood power, not as inheritance, but as something earned, guarded, and wielded. She was called a tyrant, a reformer, a seductress. But above all, she was effective. When she died in 1796, Russia was larger, wealthier, and more respected than it had been in centuries. Her empire was secure, her legacy immense. Catherine didn't simply reign, she ruled with intellect, strategy, and sheer determination. And in doing so, she became more than an empress. She became a legend. Beneath the grandeur, Catherine remained a woman navigating a world built to exclude her. She came to the throne through a coup in a country that didn't want a woman ruler. And yet, she didn't just survive. She reshaped the nation in her image. She worked endlessly, reading reports, writing state papers, managing rival factions. She wasn't a figurehead. She was a full-force sovereign. Yet, despite her power, she was often lonely. Surrounded by flatterers, artists, and lovers, she wrote of her deep distrust, even of her son Paul, whom she kept from power, fearing he'd undo everything she built. Her partnership with Potemkin, her greatest love, faded into friendship. When he died in 1791, the loss left a wound she never truly healed. Catherine crafted her myth carefully. She knew the power of narrative. She portrayed herself as a mother to Russia, an enlightened empress, and a patron of the arts. But behind every portrait was a woman who had endured betrayal, scandal, rebellion, and never stopped moving forward. When she died, she left behind not just a transformed empire, but unanswered questions. Could she have ended serfdom? Were her ideals compromised? Was she more visionary or pragmatist? History gave her the title she never claimed, the Great. Not for her kindness or perfection, but because she seized power in a world that denied it to women, and she wielded it fiercely, brilliantly, and unapologetically. She didn't just wear the crown, she redefined what it meant to deserve one. The Red Queen was not just buried, she was launched into the afterlife with precision. Every element of her tomb was part of a sacred choreography designed to navigate the treacherous terrain of Xibalba, the Maya underworld, a place of blood rivers, darkness, and gods of death. This was no restful eternity. It was a trial, and only the spiritually equipped could survive it. Her preparation speaks volumes. She was cloaked in cinnabar, sacred, toxic, transformative. Her tomb was sealed and hidden, suggesting reverence and perhaps secrecy. The jade offerings at her side, the ceremonial mask on her face, the jaguar pelt beneath her skull, each object a symbol, each placement deliberate. She wasn't buried to be forgotten. She was sent onward to become something more. And yet, the Red Queen remains nameless. No glyphs, no inscriptions, no royal declaration. Just silence. Powerful, intentional silence. Some believe this was humility before the gods. Others see it as erasure. Still, the tomb itself tells a deeper story, that of a woman who mattered deeply in life and was venerated in death. Her connection to Pakal the Great remains speculative, but compelling. The proximity of their tombs, the cinnabar, the shared royal treatment. She may have been his wife, his mother, or a high priestess whose name time has stolen. But her burial shows she was no secondary figure. She was central to the dynasty, its continuity, its myth, its soul. And perhaps that is the point. In Maya belief, legacy wasn't just written in stone. It was woven into ritual, preserved in offerings, whispered through architecture. The Red Queen's memory survives not because we know her name, but because we feel her presence. In the silence of the sealed tomb, in the gleam of ancient jade, and in the red dust still clinging to her bones. She crossed into the underworld not in fear, but in ceremony. And in doing so, she left behind a mystery that still breathes through the jungle, a legacy carved not in words, but in sacred red. A queen without a name, yet impossible to forget. Then came the moment that would fracture Frida Kahlo's body, but forge her legend. On September 17th, 1925, at just 18 years old, Frida was riding home from school on a wooden bus with her boyfriend Alejandro. The bus collided with a streetcar. The crash was catastrophic. A metal handrail pierced through her pelvis. Her spine was shattered in 3 places, her collarbone and ribs broken, her leg crushed, and her foot dislocated and mangled. She was not expected to survive. But she did. Barely alive, in excruciating pain, she lay motionless for months in a full-body cast. Her dreams of becoming a doctor dissolved in the haze of morphine and the cold certainty of her injuries. But in that forced stillness, something extraordinary emerged. A mirror was placed above her bed, a wooden easel rigged so she could paint while lying flat. And so she did. With trembling hands and defiant eyes, Frida began painting, not landscapes, not fantasies, but herself. Frida Kahlo became her own subject, her own symbol, and her own revolution. Her early works were intimate, raw, surreal reflections of her fractured body and haunted mind. She painted pain not as metaphor, but as anatomy. Vertebrae floating, nails piercing flesh, hearts exposed. She turned suffering into spectacle, silence into color. And as she healed, her art became louder. In 1929, she married Diego Rivera, the famous muralist, 20 years her senior. Their union was explosive, passionate, political, painful. Frida once described it as 2 accidents in my life, the bus and Diego. He adored her, but was unfaithful. She worshipped him, but rebelled fiercely. They divorced. They remarried. They endured. Their lives intertwined with communism, surrealism, and revolution. Their house in Coyoacán hosted Trotsky, poets, exiles, and radicals. Frida, once dismissed as Rivera's wife, emerged as her own force. While Diego painted walls, Frida painted wounds. While he was political, she was personal. And in that, she was universal. Her art exploded with symbolism. Monkeys, arrows, thorns, dual selves. Her self-portrait stared directly at the viewer, defiant, broken, radiant. She wore Tijuana dresses, braided flowers into her hair, and turned her body, scarred, corseted, amputated, into a temple of defiance. Frida Kahlo became more than an artist. She became an icon. By the 1940s, her work gained international attention. She exhibited in New York and Paris. Picasso praised her. Breton claimed her as a surrealist, though Frida rejected the label, saying, "I don't paint dreams, I paint my own reality." Her health deteriorated rapidly. Dozens of surgeries, spinal fusions, gangrene. Her right leg was amputated. Still, she painted. Still, she loved. In 1953, when doctors said she was too ill to attend her first solo exhibition in Mexico, she arrived anyway, on a stretcher, in an ambulance, and lay in a 4-poster bed, placed in the middle of the gallery, laughing, drinking, defiant. She died the following year, in 1954, at age 47. Her final diary entry read, "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return." But return she did, not in flesh, but in fire. Frida Kahlo lives in murals, on posters, in tattoos, on runways, in hearts. She is a feminist icon, a symbol of resilience, a voice for the marginalized, and a mirror for anyone who has suffered and survived. She painted herself because she knew herself. And in doing so, she allowed the world to see what courage, pain, and truth look like, wrapped in color, crowned in flowers, staring straight through history. Frida Kahlo didn't just paint. She bled onto the canvas and dared us all to look. Through love and betrayal, through marriage and autonomy, Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera remained bound, not by convention, but by art, politics, and a shared fire that neither distance nor divorce could extinguish. In the 1930s and 40s, Frida's work began gaining international recognition. While Diego painted sweeping murals of laborers and revolutionaries, Frida turned her gaze inward, onto the intimate, the painful, the raw. Her canvases were smaller, but her truths were enormous. When they traveled to the US and Europe, Frida became a sensation, not just for her bold self-portraits, but for her unflinching exploration of identity, gender, pain, and Mexicanidad. She wore traditional Tijuana dresses, long skirts to cover her withered leg, flowers in her braided hair, elaborate jewelry, and bright shawls. Her body was failing, but she turned herself into living art. She was no longer just painting culture, she embodied it. In 1938, surrealist André Breton hailed her work as a ribbon around a bomb. He invited her to exhibit in Paris, where Picasso admired her, but the critics didn't quite know what to make of her. She wasn't surrealist in the European sense. Her paintings were too real. Frida said it best. "They thought I was a surrealist, but I wasn't. I never painted dreams. I painted my own reality." Back in Mexico, her health continued to deteriorate. Polio, the streetcar crash, gangrene, chronic infections, failed surgeries. Her body became a battleground. She wore corsets made of plaster and steel. Her spine was fused. Her right leg was amputated below the knee. Each step was agony. But she never stopped painting. In fact, the pain made her art more urgent, more searing, more necessary. Her later works are fevered, vibrant, sometimes grotesque, always beautiful. She painted herself in bed, in pain, but unbroken. Her paintings, like The Broken Column, The Two Fridas, and Without Hope, captured not just suffering, but resistance. Her canvases became altars of rebellion. In 1953, Mexico held her first solo exhibition in her home country. Doctors told her she couldn't attend. So she arrived by ambulance, wheeled into the gallery on a stretcher, and held court from a bed placed in the middle of the room. cigarette in hand, a drink nearby, laughing through the pain. Frida Kahlo showed the world exactly who she was: uncontained, unashamed, unforgettable. Less than a year later, on July 13th, 1954, Frida died at 47. Officially, it was a pulmonary embolism. Unofficially, some believe it was intentional. Her last diary entry read, "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return." But Frida never really left. Her image now lives everywhere, on t-shirts and murals, in galleries and hearts. But more than that, her spirit continues to echo through every artist who refuses to be silenced, every woman who claims her pain and power, every outsider who dares to be visible. Frida Kahlo didn't paint to be famous. She painted because she had to, because her body was a battlefield and her mind was a revolution. She turned pain into art, wounds into stories, silence into defiance. She didn't just survive. She created. And in doing so, she gave the world permission to do the same. Her final painting, a still life of watermelons, was deceptively simple. Vibrant red flesh, black seeds, green rinds. But as with everything Frida created, it held more meaning than met the eye. On one of the slices, she inscribed the words, "Viva la vida," long live life. It was both a declaration and a farewell. Less than 2 weeks later, on July 13th, 1954, Frida Kahlo died at the age of 47. The official cause was a pulmonary embolism, though some have speculated that it may have been a deliberate overdose. Just days earlier, she had written in her diary, "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return." Her death was mourned across Mexico, and in the years that followed, her legend only grew. At the time of her passing, Frida had sold few paintings and was often known more as Diego Rivera's wife than as an artist in her own right. But time would rewrite that narrative. Today, Frida Kahlo is more than an icon. She is a symbol of resilience in the face of pain, of beauty born from suffering, of a woman who refused to be defined by others. Her Casa Azul is now a museum. Her face is etched on murals and stamps. Her work has inspired countless exhibitions, books, films, and movements. But beyond the iconography lies the enduring truth of her art. It was never about fame. It was about survival. She painted because she had to, because the pain had to live somewhere, because her soul demanded to be seen. And in every canvas, every blood-red stroke and haunting gaze, Frida Kahlo reminds us that even broken bodies can create unbreakable legacies. She taught us that art is not always beautiful, but it is always brave. That identity is not fixed, but chosen. That revolution begins not just in the streets, but in the mirror. And so, even in death, Frida lives. In the paintings, in the pain, in the unapologetic fire of a woman who stared down her suffering and said, "Viva la vida." We see Frida not gone, but immortal. Her legacy doesn't hang only in museums or appear only in textbooks. It lives in the brushstrokes of young artists searching for their voice. It lives in the protest chants of women demanding autonomy. It lives in the bodies of those who hurt, but choose to create anyway. Frida Kahlo is more than history. She is a heartbeat, still pulsing. In every self-portrait, she challenged us to see, not just her pain, but our own. Not just her identity, but the multitudes within each of us. Her art was never about perfection. It was about truth, no matter how jagged, how bleeding, how loud. She lived defiantly. She painted relentlessly. She loved messily. And in the end, she did what few ever do. She made the world look. At suffering, at joy, at defiance, At life, viva la vida.